School budgets are complicated things. Money comes from different sources. It comes at different times. It has its own lingo. Budgets in general are confusing, and Shrewsbury is no exception to the rule. So in this presentation, I hope to give you an overview of funding of school budgets because they are predictable. There are things that are going on that we can anticipate, and if we understand them better, I think that we will be able to better serve our schools and our community. So in this presentation, I'm going to cover the funding of school budgets, not the expenditures. That'll be another presentation, and we will move forward on this. My job is to provide insights into school budgeting, to look at a few of the budgets, because there are more than one, and how they relate to each other, to understand a little more about the state aid and what affects it, and to look at funding trends and what to expect on the revenue side. Now, how much do we spend? Well, there are several budgets. There's something called the foundation budget, which is a core budget that is created by the state, and it is used to calculate state aid. The amount of aid that a state is willing to provide a district varies from district to district. It can be as little as 18% or so of the foundation budget, or it can be over 90% of the foundation budget. And the amount of aid is based not only on what this budget dictates should be spent, but also on the town's wealth. Currently, Shrewsbury is roughly at 23% state aid, but the formula calculates several percent less at about 20% or so. The town meeting budget, however, is a portion of our operating budget. It is not the whole thing. I suspect that many citizens feel that the town appropriated school budget is the whole thing, but it is not. There is funding that is provided from other sources. And then there's the overall operational budget, which reflects the cost of day-to-day spending for the district. And then the total spend. How much do we spend for our schools, including buildings and the like? And then the town budget to give us a sense as to how much of our town's money is spent on schooling. Now, state aid is referred to as Chapter 70. We hear this a lot, and it's based on a student profile. How many students there are, how many in each grade, various demographics go into it. So larger districts will have a larger amount of a budget, and smaller districts or districts with different mixes of students will have a different one. So based on the community's wealth, which is property tax and income, the formula was changed in 2007. What they found was that although the formula came up in 1992 or 93, it hadn't been adjusted since that time, and communities' wealth wasn't reassessed. And so in 2007, they reassessed it to something they felt more fairly reflected the wealth of a community relative to the rest of the state. And the community is asked to fund based on both the income of its residents and the property that is held within the community. But keep in mind the source of the town's revenues to fund the schools is only property tax. We do not have an income tax for the town. And so we look to the property tax to do both. And the state aid is also subject to appropriation, which can be terrifying for town administrators, since if the state is having a difficult time, the appropriate funds may not flow to the school district, even if the state feels they need them. So in any event, all of these go into a foundation budget, which is used as a calculator for the state aid to aid the district for the operational budget. The foundation budget is not intended to take into consideration the cost of buildings, etc. And if we look at the foundation budget for Shrewsbury, it's roughly $60 million a year. And this amount includes what the state feels is in excess of at least $2 million that they are giving us because of calculations that were changed in 2007, and they're gradually winding us down to what they feel is a fair amount. So we've got roughly $60 million, and they provide us with roughly $20 million in aid. Now, if we look at our town meeting budget, it looks almost the same, roughly $60 million. Note also that the town meeting budget does not include strictly funds from the town, but also includes aid from the state. So of that roughly $60 million in the town meeting budget, $20 million comes as aid from the state. And it comes as aid from the state with the quid pro quo that we spend at least the maroon portion of that bar, what totals up to what they call required net school spending. Note also that there are other elements to this graph that aren't showing up in these bars. Grants, further grants from the state called circuit breaker that help us with high cost special education students, fees, debt reduction for the buildings. These are not included in either one of these budgets. Now, if we look at state aid for Shrewsbury, since the institution of the program of state aid under Chapter 70 in the early 90s, you'll note that it was going up very nicely up until 2007, and then it's essentially been flat since then, even though the required net school spending, the amount of money the state feels we should be spending on our schools, has been going up right along. Several things happened prior to 2007. We were at a point of high growth. The community went from a community of 24,000 in the early 90s to 33,000 in 2007. Big growth. This means that the property tax revenues for the town, even with Proposition 2.5, were going to be growing significantly. In addition to that, the student population grew from 3,700 in the early 90s to 5,900 in 2007. This means that the cost of running our school system was going to grow, not just based on inflation, but based on growth of the student body. But know that since 2007, although the town has continued to grow, it's only around 34 or 35,000 as of 2016. And the student population, again, has continued to grow, but has gone from roughly 5,900 to around 6,100 or so. Still, the formula from the state has remained flat. It's essentially the same. It goes up by marginal amounts of around $25 to $50 per student per year. In the context of a per student cost of $12,000 to $13,000, this does not reflect very much. And this is by intention. The state feels that they are overpaying us when they recalculated their formula, and they're winding down the percentage that they are giving us to bring us into line with their formula. So to get into this issue regarding the pressure on property tax to pay for a school system based on the wealth of the community, here's an example to try to illustrate this. So suppose we have two towns, Town A and Town B, and let's say that they have essentially the same school districts, same number of students, same mix of students, same. And let's also say that both communities have the same housing stock, same assessments, same overall value of the housing stock. But let's say that Town A has an overall income of the population that is less than Town B. What this means is that when property taxes are developed for the two towns, Town A does not have to generate as much funding for the schools as Town B. The pressure on the property tax in Town B, because of the wealth of the community based on income, not housing stock, is going to be higher than Town A. So what can we expect from state aid? Well, the intention of state aid is to equitably fund all districts based on the foundation formula. And it's based on income and property value, and we are in the top 1/3 of the state based on income and property value, by far. The state already feels that they are overfunding us by at least $2 million a year, thus aid has not kept up with inflation. And furthermore, if we look at the total amount of money that the state is putting into education, if we look at the raw numbers from 2001 up to 2017, it has gone up. But if we look at how the state budget in general has expanded, in fact, the amount of money being put into education has occupied a smaller portion of the state budget. Education is being crowded out by other factors, especially healthcare. So there are 4 budgets for us to think about here. I've gone over the town meeting budget, which includes over $2 million in excess payment from the state. But there's also the total operating school budget. This is the amount of money that we spend running our school system on a day-to-day basis. This includes special education costs, food service costs, transportation. It also will include factors such as health insurance, which our town includes in a single line in its budget for the overall town budget, and building maintenance, which again the town includes not on the school appropriated budget, but rather on the town side as a single line. So in fact, we're spending, instead of about $60 million or so on the town meeting budget, we're spending a little over $80 million on the overall operating budget. And if we look at this further, we see that grants are included here, but they occupy a very small amount. Fees are included here, again, a very small amount. The circuit breaker, which is the additional funding the state produces for us for special education, is included, again, a very small amount. If we look at the total cost of running our school system, the whole thing, buildings and the works, we're dealing with an even bigger number, in excess of $90 million a year. And this would include debt reduction, both aid from the state as well as money put in by the town, and further grants that we may get to deal with these additional costs. Now, how does this compare to the overall town budget? How much do we spend running the town of Shrewsbury? Well, a typical Shrewsbury town budget is about $120 million. And even if we include the outside sources of funding for the school system that aren't part of our overall town budget, you can see that Shrewsbury is in the business of running a school system, that the vast majority of money that we spend as a town goes into the school system. You can also see that when we look at revenue sources for the town budget, that it is not all property tax. Property tax is responsible for 50 to 60% of that amount, but we get other state aid, we get the Chapter 70 aid, we have other local fees in addition. So what about grants and fees? Is there an opportunity for us to raise more money in that area? Well, if we look at grants and fees for the period from 2008 to 16, the total government grants, tied mostly to special education, have been flat at around $2 million a year. Fees have undergone repeated increases, athletic fees, bus fees, activities, tuition. We have several fees within our district. We've nearly doubled them from about $3 million to about $5 million a year. School lunch is another source of revenue, but it's essentially self-paying here in Shrewsbury, which is unusual. Many districts actually subsidize their food services. We ask them to raise the funds for themselves, but it really can't be viewed as an external source of revenue for the rest of the school system. So what about property tax and Proposition 2.5? Well, the property tax that we have is tied to population growth as well as a statutory limitation of raising the funds from property by 2.5% a year. It's about 50 to 60% of our town revenue, and the rest is state aid, excise tax, and fees. So we have limitations here, and I think that what we need to understand is that the other sources of revenue, the state aid, the fees that we have, are rather limited and not really something that we can look to as a dependable way of raising funds. The only dependable way we have of raising funds is our property tax, and that is approximately 50 to 60% of the town revenue. As a result of this, the town manager does a 5-year projection each year, and his projection in 2016 was for us to essentially go into deficit starting approximately FY18 or FY19, and to increase in deficit going forward with the limitations of Proposition 2.5, and I will also say with an estimate of school costs that is actually below what the town meeting settled on following this projection. So the main revenue points that I want to make are that the base state aid has been flat for a decade and cannot be expected to increase. Grants have been flat for the past decade. Fee revenues have nearly doubled in the decade, but even a 10% increase would only yield about $500,000, and this is not something we could look to do each year. Nearly all inflationary pressure shifts to the town appropriated budget, and the growth of property tax revenues is limited. These are the things we need to consider when we're trying to consider how to fund our schools and how to move forward. These are all predictable. As we look to the future, we need to take these things into consideration when we do our planning. Thank you.